Well, my watch says 2:30, so we're going to start. Thank you all for being here on time. We certainly want to honor your time. We know you have a lot of options this afternoon of where you can be, and we appreciate you being here supporting the Emerging Leader panel. My name is Tina Jordan, and I'm the Vice President of Membership at AFCEA International. For those of you who may not know, emerging leaders is the term that we use for AFCEANs that are under the age of 40. And these folks are here not because they're under the age of 40, but because of their expertise and their experience in the field, and they just so happen to be under the age of 40. We appreciate your time and support in being here today. You're in for a great session because our emerging leaders always have a great perspective on AI, IT, and cyber. So to start, I would like to introduce the moderator of today's panel, and that is Mareta Morovitz. Mareta is the lead for cybersecurity engineering and cyber deception at MITRE. She focuses her work on adversary engagement, malware analysis, and reverse engineering. Mareta is also one of AFCEA's 40 Under 40 award winners from 2021. Our 40 Under 40 award is given to 40 individuals under the age of 40 for the outstanding work they do in the STEM field. So congratulations again, Mareta. And what I'm going to do is just turn it over to you, and you can you can introduce the panel. So let's give a warm AFCEA welcome to Mareta and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here. We have a really great panel, and I think there's a lot we can dive into. So without any further ado, I want to introduce, so we have Tony from ECS, we have Micah from Elastic, we have Brian from Cyberpoint International, and we have Shamara from Intelligenesis. So with that, I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about what they do with their first question here. So we're going to start with some intros, and I'm also going to shamelessly steal from General Skinner's keynote this morning and ask each panelist to start with, wouldn't it be cool if, and then something about AI to kick us off. So with that, I will hand it over to Tony.
All right. Hey, thank you very much. So what I'm going to start off with, and hopefully this will spur some conversation, is wouldn't it be cool if we had more cybersecurity data that was labeled? And I'll explain why that would be a very cool thing here in the near future. But with that, I'm going to pass it down to Micah, right? Yeah, Micah.
Hey everyone, my name is Micah. I work currently at Elastic. My background is primarily in cyber and software development, cyber engineering. I'm in a group called Threat Research and Detection Engineering, so that's pretty much where we focus. In terms of the question, I like to think about, decades ago when people thought it was crazy to take a piece of paper and send it into a machine and receive it on the other end. That turned out to be the fax machine, and a couple years later they argued about computers being hosted in pockets. That turned out to be the cell phone. And I think it would be cool if in the future the cyber operators world looked completely different than it does today. Instead of like the hands-on keyboard, developing carpal tunnel from typing and hacking away, they're walking into their knock sock or whatever you have it, and have maybe a cup of coffee in their hand, and they're talking to a machine that says, tell me about, the events that happened last night. Give me the latest and greatest news. And then this machine talks back to you and says, last night we saw this type of activity and we mitigated in this way or that way. And I have a couple recommendations for what we could do next, because we see this oncoming incursion of cyber activity. Just being able to have a human machine kind of partnership, instead of the hands-on keyboard model, or maybe even just being able to think about it, whether it's just using Neuralink technology or whatever the case may be, just communicating in a way that does give us the advantage, thinking at the speed of thought. I think that would be cool. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Micah. My name is Brian Beahy. I'm a lead data scientist for Cyberpoint International. My background is I've spent the better part of a decade delivering machine learning solutions for DoD clients. At present, I currently serve NSA, U.S. Cyber Command, and United States Air Force. Largely, I specialize in model development, looking to detect, building machine learning models to do threat detection, and then recently have included skill sets involving machine learning operations. So once we have models, how do we get those models into production? How do we monitor them? How do we maintain them? And all the work that goes into that side of the house. As far as what would be cool would be, and I'm going to steal or borrow off of Anthony. Cyber data sets that are labeled and open source.
Good afternoon. My name is Shamara Clarkson. I work for Intelligenesis, best company around if you're interested. I've been there since day one, so I can say that. I currently serve as a senior software support specialist. I also work for DoD primarily, and I've been doing that for 25 years within more SIGINT types of data sets. So with that, I believe that it would be cool if AI could actually deliver and stay relevant. I feel like it's kind of a cyclical thing, kind of goes in and out of fashion, and I would just hope that we could find small solutions that lead us to that greater good that we're looking for when it comes to artificial intelligence.
Great. So just a couple things before we dive into the next set of questions. We're really going to try to make this panel a conversation. So while we went down the road this time, from this point on, we're going to sort of popcorn around. But on that, if anyone in the audience has questions for the panelists as we're kind of moving through topics, feel free to throw your hand up. And then as we get to a break in the conversation, we'll turn it around to audience questions as well as we go.
Sorry, I got so excited about the question, I forgot to introduce myself. Tony Zek. So I work for ECS. We do a bunch of government contracting, both in cyber and AI. I've got a background in intelligence, cyber, as well as data analytics. So I'm really thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So one thing you might have noticed when my bio came up was that the words AI were not found anywhere in it. So I have pages and pages of questions that I've written for the panelists because I'm really excited to explore this topic. And while I did watch iRobot and Terminator, they didn't quite answer my questions. So with that, we're going to dive right in. And the first one is really basic. We hear AI and cyber all the time. It's kind of a buzzword. What the heck does that actually mean?
Well, I'll start here. It does not mean the Terminator. I think the movie The Terminator has done a lot of damage to what people think AI can actually do. People have this vision of this fully autonomous, entity, powered by machine precision, going out and finding whatever it is its mission is. And that's not at all the case of what AI is capable of today. AI, at least in the way I view it, is a shift in paradigm in programming, moving from a deterministic model where you have very kind of binary outcomes or decisions to one where you're able to handle probabilistic type questions. Things that humans are better at doing traditionally than machines, but machines are starting to be good at that. So AI is right now kind of state of the art AI can give you answers to questions like, is this picture a picture of a dog or a cat? So it's good at handling these defined problem sets in a probabilistic manner. And we'll get a little bit deeper into what that means later. But it's not just ability to handle unconstrained problem sets. It's not like some autonomous being out there at the moment. People are certainly working on that, but we're definitely not there yet. And this is, I think, at the heart of a lot of misconceptions about AI today. People think that it is the autonomous Terminator and not that, is this picture a dog or a cat? And so then they give AI and cyber in particular these tasks, or think it can do these tasks that it can't really do. But at the same time, well, that seems kind of like a vanilla answer, right? Hey, is this a dog or a cat? It really is actually quite powerful in subtle ways. Because you can turn that kind of thinking into really advanced questions like, is this file a piece of malware or not? which then has significant impacts on how people do operations.
Yeah, and I think I would say from the other side of that, it's for the operators, it's kind of a scary concept, right? For people who don't have backgrounds in data science or computer science, they're not engineers, they're people who are operators. They understand commands and TTPs, and they know how to maneuver through networks. When they see concepts like AI, it's kind of almost a daunting thing, a black box, or something like, hey, I don't use that, right? It's one of those things that as we move forward, we want to continue to either make the black box a little bit more transparent, easier to use for the operators, or just easier to understand so that the level of entry is just reduced.
Yeah, I almost want to ask a question around this, which is like, what makes for a good problem that AI can solve in cyberspace, right? In the cyber domain. Like, what are the characteristics and features, those in the C-suite need to be thinking about, or even data scientist practitioners, right? What are the things they need to be thinking about to say, okay, this is where I want to put my time and money, right? Effectively. Anyone? I have thoughts, but.
I believe it was stated a little bit earlier, that data tagging, companies getting together and doing the right thing, and making sure that we've labeled the data properly so that we could actually utilize it in the right way. So,
I'll add on to that question that you're talking about there, Brian. I think first organizations should look at what problems do I need to solve? What questions do I have right now that are unanswered and really unanswerable using conventional techniques? And then look at the data associated with them. Do I have it? And then you can get a good idea of, can I use a data science technique potentially to solve this? If you don't start off with that mission, the reason that you want to apply an advanced analytic technique, you're going to have a lot of difficulty successfully applying AI. You're either not going to have the data to build the algorithm, or you're not going to get results that you want, or even when you're building an algorithm, if you're not really sure what you want in the end, you don't really even know how to measure what success looks like. And that makes it really difficult to structure analytics, almost impossible, which is also why you see a lot of failures of AI out there.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of times engineers, they see the solution before understanding the actual problem, right? The answer to what question are we trying to solve? And so, we as engineers sometimes we get caught up with, can we build enough to get the amount of data? Do we have the God's eye view on the data in order to really get back to the root question, instead of scoping and refining that initial hypothesis of what our answer or what questions are we trying to answer?
Yeah, so I think I'll build on this a little bit by trying to get at the question of what makes AI hard in cyber? What makes it difficult and challenging? So first, we're modeling in an environment that has an active adversary, right? They're trying to obfuscate their techniques and their methods, and the environment with which we model in is not static, it is dynamic, and the rules of the game change, right? Imagine, we build models to play chess, and we're really good at that, right? But the rules of the game of chess don't change. Suddenly, queens don't start jumping off the board and moving to other sides of the board. So that makes for that dynamic environment makes it extremely challenging to write good models to detect the kind of threat behavior that we're trying to get at. Additionally, we don't benefit in AI and cyber. We don't benefit from the same kind of benefits that other domains get. So when you see these amazing advances in NLP, for example, the amount of research and the kinds of models that they build, I can take those models and reuse them for specific tasks in my domain. So I get to leverage all the information and all the work and all the training that's gone into building those other models and using them for my fine-tuning them or doing transfer learning to use those for my specific task. In cyber, we don't have that, right? We don't have an overarching cyber model that generalizes to all manner of problems that then I can then use to specifically tune and target the types of threats I might be trying to detect, or workflows and processes that I'm trying to improve. Everything we do has to be built from the ground up over and over and over again. Lastly, I'll just mention we also have this issue of when we build models when we train them on data from, say, network A, we can't take that model and go deploy it over here to network B and expect efficacy. Or even if we have the same data sources, the same features, our models may not generalize. And there's lots of technical reasons for that, but this sort of highlights what makes these problems hard. So I guess maybe flipping the script then, if we're thinking about, well, how do I know, given a resource-constrained environment, where should I be putting my dollars and my people in this space? Well, some heuristics you might use. First, if I were making these investment decisions, the first kind of problem I'm going after are workflow and processes, right? How can I use AI to force multiply my analysts, right, who are in the trenches, hands on keyboard? Right. Case in point, I'm currently working on a project where we're building out a zero trust network for the Air Force. And in 3 months of proof of concept, with no users, just administrators hooking things up and turning cables on and all the rest, we've generated over 6 billion log events in a 3-month time period. That is not a tractable space for an analyst or an army of analysts to get through. Right? So we need AI as an example, right, to look at that problem and categorize and classify and bend those types of alerts and log events into a tractable space that our SOC analysts, as an example, can get to. So that's kind of where I'm targeting first and foremost, the kinds of ways I can leverage AI to improve my workflows and processes of my teams.
Defining the problem, I think we've got it.
Yeah, I'll pause at this point. Is there anyone in the audience with any questions about sort of AI of today? Is that a hand?
Hi, Dave Nemiroff with DISA. I want to say I appreciate all your insights. I've got one question. A lot of you talked about labeling. I needed to label the data. And my question is, how would I recognize a good labeling semantic versus a poor labeling systemology or semantic?
Question.
I'll take a stab at this. Well, it depends on your objective, right? This all gets back to properly, defining your problem, understanding what you want to do, and your labeling should support that. If you want to identify a file as malicious or not, your labels should support that. If you want to get more granular in your definitions, your labels need to support that as well. It really is about the use case that you have. And a lot of AI and data science is all about the data engineering. So not only should your labels support your use case, they should also support the data that you have available.
Generating an incredible test set for your models. Right, whatever labeling strategy you leverage, right, there needs to be some way to evaluate that model, and you should be doing it on some sort of unseen data that model hasn't had a chance to interact with at all. Would be my immediate response. That is definitely a challenging question.
And what are your thoughts on synthetic testing, our data sets, or how do you feel about using real world scenarios versus things that we can create in a test environment?
I'm strongly opposed.
Really?
So,
yeah.
Wow.
I'll deviate from that. If you want from that.
Yeah, sure. So this is the challenge we get into AI. So there's some problems where if I train a model from data from, say, network A, and I try to apply that model to network B, even if I have the same features, if my feature distributions are different, right, then that model is not going to generalize. You'll experience model degradation. And so synthetic data is sort of the same thing. If I generate synthetic attacks in synthetic data, the kind of behavior that normal users in that traffic are exhibiting is not necessarily the type of normal behavior you would see in a real network, or the network that you're targeting to deploy these models into. So that's sort of what makes it challenging.
So I will say it depends. Real data is always preferable, for sure, but it's not always available. In fact, particularly in cyber, it's not available a lot of the time, and that's because of a lot of the issues with data sharing. Right, you're talking about very sensitive data potentially, where you can't share that. So then you kind of have to look at the trade-off space, right? Of, yes, my model's not going to be great with the synthetic data, but is that acceptable to me? You know, is that level of degradation something that I can accept? Or do I really need the real data? And then that goes into a whole conversation / investment paradigm where you're, you know, do I need to go out and collect more data somehow or create better synthetic data? So really the answer, famous engineering answer is, it depends.
Doug Reynolds from DFAS. Are all of you familiar with EMAS and the risk management framework? You know, there's like over 1,000 test results for most systems to get an authorization to operate. Have you been through that drill? Okay. Also, there's that. Plus, if you're a financial management system, there's something called FizCam. Are you all familiar with FizCam? It's basically a federal financial system audit. The tests are similar, but tend to be a little bit broader. But some test results, some of the test results, and the wording is identical. Some is not, but close. And then you've got SSAE 18. Now, those are financial statement type things, auditing standards. So it used to be as a cybersecurity guy, I only had to worry about RMF. Then about 2012, they threw FizCam at us, and then a couple of years later, SSAE 16, and followed on by now SSAE 18. It is a mess. It takes forever. There's no such thing as real-time monitoring with RMF. You can do a bit of it, but that's the problem set. Have you seen anything that AI could do to help us with this terrible situation? Thank you.
Was it multiple standards as the problem? Or just financial security as a whole?
No, financial system.
Yeah, the problem is in order to continue to operate every 3 years, you have to get what's called an authorization to operate.
AOT.
If you guys were DoD civilians, you get paid. You can see what your pay status is in my pay. That particular web app needs to have an authorization to operate. To go through that, they have to provide 1,000 test results.
So
Anyway, whatever.
So I think we have time for maybe one response to sort of, this seems like there's a lot of different systems, a lot of different data. What is the opportunity space for sort of AI in that kind of an environment?
let me, Arnie, go ahead.
I was just gonna actually pose a question. Actually, like maybe, I mean, it's not even AI related, unfortunately, but maybe blockchain, like some sort of ledger system, a way to I don't know, be able to stamp something and make sure that it's exactly what it is supposed to be. Basically, like label it in such a way where we know where it came from and where it's going. That possibly could help in the financial sectors, I guess is what I'm thinking.
So let me take a stab at some of this. So some of the RMF you can automate, right? Automation doesn't necessarily mean you need to use AI. A lot of it is deterministic type programming. You know, if A, then B. So you can handle a lot of that. RMF is supposed to be, risk oriented. I'm not going to try and plug myself too hard here, but I've actually been building an application to help with RMF risk assessment using AI. evaluating what threat is, and how adversaries will leverage certain vulnerabilities. And I won't put a product pitch in here. And then additional steps where you have probabilistic things that need to happen with RMF. You can probably leverage AI, maybe NLP to do large assessments of text, right? But really, where you'd want to do is you want to take a look at the process behind an RMF package or any of these other packages, see what those steps are, see what you can automate, and see where AI might be plugged in appropriately to handle that.
I think this sort of fits in nicely with where I kind of wanted to go with our next thing, which is there's a lot of challenges. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hey, thanks a lot. Dave Richard from Intel. Your insights are great. I have a question on priority. Of all the tools and technology investments, where would you put AI on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being the most important right now that you need to invest in, and why?
I'll take a stab at that. Without going through a long list of all the different tools that you have out there, I would say one of the most important things that we need, if it was boxed into a tool, would be a way to protect our data, right? And I'm not talking about just the typical company data, the bytes that come from the machines. I'm also talking about human data, right? So I would say that would be number one. I think number two would all come from there. Without good data, without data we can trust, machine learning, deep learning, those things kind of go out the window.
Yeah, I would follow that up with, I'd put it up high, an 8 or a 9 in terms of the investment scale for looking for AI solutions in the space. But understand, I say that with a bit of a caveat that AI projects and AI efforts are by nature high risk, high reward. For the right problem and the right data and the right people, it can be a force multiplier, undoubtedly. In the wrong space, in the wrong data, bad data, synthetic data, it can be nothing short of catastrophic. I mean, right? Everyone see the Zillow story? Invested millions in algorithms and to buy products to predict, buy houses to predict valuations, and they lost $300 million. So it's a real. The problem's there. Yeah. So.
All right, we have one more question over here, and then we're going to toss it back to Moretta to go on with her question. So let's do one more.
Howdy. The classification problems with cybersecurity data hits home for me because I'm one of the CSSP managers of one of the 27 JFHQ Doden accredited CSSPs.
Hey.
My question is, what are the biggest problems you've encountered with backpropagation within the DoD? Given, as we've talked about, states change, information flows change, data changes, things like that, within your own experiences.
So at the risk of getting too technical, I would say like vanishing gradients is a big problem. Without the right data, the right model architecture, you end up with neural networks that don't converge. So the parameters you use in your architecture are really important. How you tackle that, grid search or otherwise, that gets you to overcoming that kind of a challenge. Happy to talk deeper if you want after. Yeah.
All right. So I think this has been a great kind of discussion on where AI is today and sort of some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, the challenges. So my next question is, how has things changed recently, and how can we kind of use that to see and make predictions about where things are going in the future? And when we come back for TechNet, 10 years from now, what are we going to be talking about in this space, do you think?
The grand resurgence, I think, because I think we're kind of getting away from it again because we've been seeing a lot of failures with the autonomous vehicles and things of that nature. And so people are getting afraid to basically invest their money within that area. And it seems like they're going more towards, in the same scenario, more towards electric vehicles instead of autonomous because they're seeing success within that area. So I just think that we're going to probably move away from it, and hopefully we'll get to do a lot of more deep thinking on solutions within this space, and then 10 years from now, there'll be a resurgence and we'll be even better. And that's what I think.
That's great. I 100% agree. I would say what I really hope in 10 years, when we're sitting here, in 10 years that we're talking about explainable AI. I hope we're talking about models that can not only give you the predictions and tell you whether things are threats or not, but they can also tell you why they're making that decision, and not just giving you like the logs that it flagged on, but also like, what was the reasoning behind the features and the probability distributions that it learned, and all the things that go into this sort of nascent field of having models tell you like why it's making the choices that it's making.
Yeah, and I think 5-10 years ago, engineers had if-else statements in order to help make decisions. Then we progressed towards more security orchestration, kind of SOAR SIEM kind of capabilities. 5-10 years from now, I definitely see, recommender systems, something that can provide a list of options for you, and also, like you mentioned earlier, just explain why these options, where to get the data from, how to make its judgments, so on and so forth.
So I'm going to say we're starting to see an increasing stratification within AI and data science. And what I mean by that is that not everybody has to have a doctorate in applied math in order to leverage AI anymore. Like, you don't need to hire a team of doctors to build an AI solution. Just like, when you go, if you flew here, you didn't fly on a jet piloted by somebody who built the jet or designed it. There's a difference between building a library like TensorFlow and building algorithms and then using them. And I think we're going to see that trend continue. You're going to kind of have this spectrum of tools where that's going to enable folks maybe with less AI-specific skills and more skills in a particular discipline, like cybersecurity, to use some of these tools that right now require a lot more education in terms of AI. And I think we're going to see that trend continue and that spectrum to continue to diverge. And organizations should keep that in mind when they're thinking about their own AI investments. Do you need a team of doctors working on, your own bespoke algorithm, or can you use stuff that's off the shelf? Understanding the trade-offs between those two is very important for organizations.
I think you need a team of doctors.
So let's back to that synthetic thing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with what you said, Anthony. I think there's definitely a push to make AI solutions more easy button, more accessible, right? But I would be, if I'm thinking risk mitigation, I want someone in the room to tell me, right, what was the methodology behind the models that were built? How were they trained? There are just so many caveats that come with not understanding your data and the training process that, like, I would be nervous if you told me that I train models with a drag and drop tool and we got success in cyber.
That's true. But this is becoming more stratified, and I would look at I would right now characterize AI and cyber as being very immature. If you look at some of the more mature models, more mature areas, particularly like image recognition, you have off-the-shelf models like YOLO that do a very good job, without a whole lot of understanding necessarily of how they were specifically built. Not everybody needs to rebuild that. But again, it's the famous engineering answer, it depends. You have to understand what your use case is, what the penalty is if you get something wrong. Is that oh, hey, that was interesting, we got that wrong, or hey, like we crashed a jetliner. The two are very different. So those are things you need to keep in mind, but I don't think you need a team of doctors, although that helps if you have that budget.
What's the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence? Machine learning, written in Python. AI, written in PowerPoint.
You know, I think that over time, you know, even when you pull down these models from Hugging Face or using the latest and greatest GPT, whatever model, you know, these days you're not getting down to the compiler point. You know, the people who are using it, they're not compiling that down themselves. That they could, they can pull the open source down and compile these models themselves. But a lot of times, people these days are using these almost open source models, open source REST API based services, right? As technology moves to service as a next thing, that I imagine in the future will be the same thing for all of these really highly trained or extensible months or years worth of data, you know, type services.
Brian looks like he has a response.
No, I think you're 100% correct. NLP, image classification, the YOLO library you mentioned, there is room for folks to pull those models down and leverage them for their particular problem space. I'm thinking more along, if you're telling me you're building models for doing threat detection and cyber data, I'm gonna want some experts in the room to be able to look at that and you know, provide their evaluation.
And I think that's a great point too, and it speaks to the maturity of where we are in you know, machine learning, AI, and cybersecurity. We're not at that level right now, and some of it has to do with data, some of it has to do with you know, approaches to how we're doing this. You know, we've got a long way to go in cybersecurity, that's for sure.
Indeed.
It looks like we have some audience questions, so go right ahead.
Yes, hello. It's Jonathan Purnell, also with CyberPoint. So to the question of the maturity and the skill level of the actual practitioner, how about the maturity of an organization? How mature does an organization need to be to leverage AI? Should they tackle infusing automation first, to Tony's point earlier, or can an organization just jump right in and leverage AI?
I would imagine you would probably have two swim lanes. One that's doing the what do we need today to solve the problems today, but also looking towards the future, right? I would have a track that's doing the security automation to move towards autonomy, and also have the more edgy wins, the bets that you want to put down for the future, so you can kind of leapfrog the adversary, if you will.
I was just going to say, I think it goes back to the problem again. I think it depends on what the company's trying to do. Like, have you defined what your problem set is, and then can you use AI to as a solution, basically?
Yeah, I think in my time I've seen there's a maturity curve. The first step of that is getting a descriptive understanding of the state of, let's say, this is AI for cyber, right? So do I even know what's going on my network, right? That's like step one. Step two is then, okay, now I've got whatever rules and other things I might like a Splunk essential security tool or something like that might be your next step to say, okay, now I'm doing the appropriate data collection. I've got some things that are looking for some threat vectors, right? And then maybe the third step in there is to say, okay, now I'm interested in introducing some kind of AI solution into my space, right? Maybe that's at that point, you've got maybe a foundation, you've got data feeds flowing, hopefully you've hired the right people, and you can get at that, incorporating that into your stack. Yeah.
Great, I think we have a couple more audience questions, so let's do 2 more audience questions, and then we'll...
Hi, I'm Maya. So I have a question about trusted AI. As you've talked about it a little, but I'm curious if you've ever come into a situation where you thought that you knew what success would look like. You had that success use case, and then you thought that the AI solved it, but then it didn't really, or if that's something that happens, and how you do actually know what success looks like.
How many models have I thrown in the trash bin because they were garbage? Yeah, I mean that's the nature of the process.
Yeah,
Yeah, you don't want to be static. I think
Yeah.
I think the thing with the AI is that you're constantly having to retrain these models, and I think that's where things go wrong. I've worked on a team where we used, this is kind of old school, HMM, hidden Markov model, to basically tag data sets. It was doing a great job, but industry changes, the data itself changes, and we didn't put resources towards defining a new rule set and training, making new rules for that model. And so I could say that we thought we were being successful because it was doing what we wanted it to do, but as the data changed, we were able to see that it was just basically degrading as time went on. And so I think that's, just to answer your question, I've seen success, but I note that if you don't put the proper resources towards making sure that it stays up to date, that's where the true problems come in. You have to put the resources in to keep that model relevant. So.
Yeah.
And we have one more audience question.
Hi, Cindy Larson, Quantum Research International. I was wondering what your thoughts are on kind of anti-AI, like kind of piggybacking on your testing answer, but how do you really test that AI robustly and make sure that we all have the trust that we want in the AI, right? So what is the anti or counter AI? I'm not sure what the right term is, but what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, as if our job wasn't hard enough. Yeah, this is I can give you an example. So just recently we worked on a project where we used a method called reinforcement learning to introduce changes into malware files such that we change the signature of the file, but we don't break the functionality of the malware. And we use this as a way to do some security testing on other machine learning classifiers that had been built to detect malware. And sure enough, we were able to beat those classifiers. Additionally, we were able to use those techniques to beat commercial AV in a number of instances. So adversarial AI is real. The tactics that we use to build models to detect threat vectors are the same tactics that adversaries can use to beat our very models that we build. So I guess just as a heuristic, I think if you're curating, it gets back to curating really good data sets. I would highly encourage, if you think there's an adversarial component to the problem you're tackling, a la malware detection, it'd be really important to look into and research how we can use those techniques, modify malware examples, and then introduce that into my training set to hopefully build a better detector. So.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that. Data engineering is key to any of these activities, and getting really good training sets is very important, both in terms of adversarial activity as well as environmental changes. You really need to think about what's behind that data set and where you're going to use this algorithm, because algorithms that may work just fine in one context, you switch them to another, and all of a sudden it breaks. And all the functionality that you thought you had is no longer present.
So I'm going to pause for a second because this is a great segue into the next set of questions that I wanted to talk about. So while I did watch Wall-E, I also did watch a few actual technical talks. And one of them was with Google's head of AI, Jeff Dean. And he talked a lot about the need for the different concerns we have to keep in mind when we're building models, and that's around fairness, around interpretability, around security, around privacy. And so I'm curious, we've been talking a bit about the need for good data and good models. Can you talk a little bit about how some of these concerns apply to the cyberspace and sort of how we can be thinking about the future and what we need to be kind of keeping in mind with our data, and sort of what is the opportunity space with those kind of concerns in mind?
Yeah, I think when last year or the year before, when some of these big monolithic models were released, one of the major articles that came shortly after was all of these models are heavily biased towards different races and creeds. And from the cyber security perspective, obviously those are one of those things that we would want to watch very closely as we're trying to understand specifically how the decision that's been made how the model's arrived at that decision, right? So if it's targeting certain machines from an offensive perspective, we want to make sure it's targeting them for the right reasons. And similarly, on the flip side of things, if it's protecting certain machines, high value assets versus the other ones, we want to make sure we understand them. So, yeah, I think some of that bias, has been discussed. It's not a new problem. It's been out for a couple of years, and I think it's one of those things that we just have to continue to refine through training and adding more and more data, especially as a lot of these open source models are heavily trained on like the world's data, which in itself has a lot of bias.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree, and there's a real challenge to even seasoned data scientists get tripped up on the kinds of biases that can creep into your data. So the antidote in the foreseeable future is education and experience working in these domains, and being cognizant and aware that absolutely the model garbage in, garbage out is the rule of the day here. So.
So one of the other things too that when you're going into your initial use case assessment, you also want to make sure you really look at what you're doing and how it could go really wrong, and then what success would look like. You really have to understand like some of the potential pitfalls, because in many ways, machine learning and AI is a black box still, and it could come up with results that might surprise you, and not in a good way. So you always, when you're starting off, you need to frame that risk and understand what might go awry.
So you actually just said something that I thought was interesting, the education piece. And I didn't plan to ask this question, but because I have a microphone, I'm going to. And so the need for education and sort of bringing up the next generation. What can the folks that are in the field now do to help enable the folks that are coming up? And what can we do to sort of help mentor and educate, and sort of what are the resources that you would recommend that mentors can look for their mentees?
Yeah, so right off the bat, at CyberPoint, and Dreamport specifically, the facility that we work out of, we run a fairly robust internship program. We're constantly bringing in what we call the new leaders of the future, providing them the opportunities to get real-world, hands-on experience. So any opportunity there is for folks out there to support those kind of programs it goes a long way.
I agree. Hands-on training for sure. I think in school you can be theoretical and understand networks, and until you come across it on your own Wireshark screen, it doesn't make sense, honestly. So I think that hands-on, for sure.
I'll say, I think it's also important, if you're a data scientist in a company, you need to educate those around you as well, to include your leadership. Give them one-on-one briefs. Hey, what is this AI thing? What can we do for you? What are some potential pitfalls that you need to be aware of? It's very important, even though leadership doesn't necessarily need a data science degree. They need to understand kind of some basics about it in order to be able to make decisions about it. So it's not only important to make sure that the data scientists are continuing education, but everybody that interacts with it or makes decisions based off of what you're doing has at least a basic understanding of the process and the capabilities associated with it.
And just one more thing, if you are a data scientist, please take the time to actually try to understand the data and look at it from multiple ways. I've seen people applying data science methods and the actual conclusions being incorrect just for the sheer lack of they never thought of the data being presented in a different way. So that would be another thing that I would speak about when it comes to new people within this environment.
Hear, hear.
Learn your data. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with all those points. The last thing I would say is that, you want your folks to get comfortable with knowing that things are going to change, staying in that continual learning mode, from language to technology, so yeah, just keep learning.
Great. Pause again, so we have about 5 minutes. Any other audience questions?
Perfect. This is going to be the lightning round because we got 3 questions, okay? So quick questions, quick answers.
well, I don't know how quick it's going to be. I'm not a doctor, but every leadership brief that we've attended, they always say, deliver quickly to the warfighter. How can we build AI and ML to deliver quickly to the warfighter?
Small problem. Answering small.
Yes.
Answering the small problems. Making things that are just like helpful. The little things. Don't try to do the pie in the sky thing right away. Just solve those small things that actually, give your analysts and your warfighter more time to be effective, and then move on to that pie in the sky.
Yeah, and I would say commit, right? Without committing to it, you're never going to get started, but without consistency, you'll never finish. So.
Since we don't have too much time, we're going to jump to the next question.
There you go.
Just quickly to build upon similar, what are some voice track for value proposition ROI when trying to convince our senior leaders to commit to AI for cybersecurity?
Come up with a solid use case to start off. Say, hey, what would the ROI on this particular use case be? And if you can answer that question appropriately, and then the second follow-on, can I solve this with AI? You have your use case right there. You should start with the use case, not, hey, I'm going to slap some AI on this. Because if that's your objective, you can deliver that pretty easily, but you're not going to get much utility out of it. And in fact, you'll probably set your program back because nobody's going to trust it afterwards.
Yeah, it takes my analyst 2 hours to remediate an issue. If we can get an AI solution that can speed up their workflow, they can remediate it in 10 minutes. Right? Those are the kinds of metrics I've found most successful in convincing my leadership to put dollars up for us to do our work.
All right, and we have one more over here.
Hi everyone, my name is Himani. Question to you about defending security tools that use machine learning embedded. So how do we defend the defenders, right? So what if you have an attacker that's coming at your machine learning tools? How do we defend that? What's a solution that you think would work? An intrusion detection system? Another layer of file integrity monitoring? What are your thoughts?
I feel like if the adversary has gotten to your machine learning models, you're in so much trouble. That's like, right? In some ways, ML sits at the perimeter, just sits at the same level of the rest of your security tools. So I think the same kinds of questions apply to if the Trend Micro box just got popped, or if my Carbon Black agent just got popped. What would you do? Yeah.
So with this, you also need to really look at your training data. We could do a whole lecture on just adversarial AI because there's a lot to it. One of the ways people attack machine learning models are through poisoning data, through understanding your model that way. So that's something that you really have to be aware of, particularly if you're using an off-the-shelf model, because that means somebody else can get it and they can figure out how to fool it.
We have 2 minutes. Is there one more quick question from the audience?
Yeah, there we go.
All right, you get 30-second answers.
Howdy. Kind of along those same lines, obviously we have a culture of perfection in the DoD, so we've been talking about answering an easy question first. Can you how you were able to set up that quick win, that easy win, and break through that DoD culture of perfection?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't have any, right. I'm not thinking of any real ones, but I have just an example that might help. Think about something that your supervisors obviously care about, repeatedly over and over and over, and break it down to the perspective of resources, right? Because at the end of the day, they are managers and they have to manage not only the people, but their time. So if you could show them that that you've been able to deliver in time that's been chapters. I think they'll get the point without even having to explain what AI is or machine learning or whatever else the case may be.
Setting expectations is important here. And this also goes into your use case. If you notice, there's a theme in my commentary. If you set the right expectations, you're going to be okay, as long as leadership understands that. Sometimes a 60% solution is better than the current one, which is a 0% solution. So you just need to understand kind of what is and make sure everybody is on board with that.
Yeah, just to give you a quick specific example I can think of that was on class. So we had a problem where there were threat intelligence reports that were being generated, but we had there was no way to really link them in ways to identify over the course of multiple reports, is this all from one campaign, or these from different campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. So we were able to fairly quickly spin up a machine learning technique performing link prediction on those reports. And we were able to show that clusters of those reports were actually related. And so just something like that, where you can tactically get at a problem that provides value to the end analyst, those are the kinds of wins we go for.
Great. And with that, I think we have reached the end of our time. So big thank you to the panelists, and thank you to all of you for joining us today.
Let's give a round of applause to this panel. So Linda Newton over here is the chapter president of the Hawaii chapter, and she was saying she loves the EL panels because you guys don't always agree on everything, and you kind of throw something that we've always learned the ELs don't hold back. And it's great to get a perspective from people that were born into technology as opposed to those of us who migrated to it later in life. So we certainly appreciate the expertise you brought, the knowledge you brought, and just the experiences you brought and you shared. And we always appreciate your perspective. So thank you very much. Loretta, great job hosting. For somebody who doesn't know AI and has only seen some movies on it, I think you did a great job hosting. So thank you. Let's give a round of applause to Loretta. And to Tony, Micah, Brian, and Shamara, thank you. We appreciate you taking your time. We appreciate all of you being here today. And John Stressing, please stand up. He's one of our emerging leaders, and he puts together all of our panels at the AFCEA event. So thank you very much, John, for that. So there will be an emerging leader sponsored reception this evening from 5 to 7 at Tiranog. Is that how you say it? Tiranog. Tiranog. You can Google it. It's from 5 to 7. It's sponsored. It's for emerging leaders or people who support emerging leaders. So you don't have to be under the age of 40 to go. If you want to go and mix and mingle with these folks and these experts, please join us at Tiranog at 5 o'clock. Otherwise, have a great AFCEA day. Enjoy the rest of today. We have a reception on the floor. We have a micro keynote 3:30 to 4, and then another keynote 4 to 4:30 in Hall G. Then we have a reception on the floor from 4:30 to 5:30, and you'll want to cut out early to go to Tiranog for the emerging leader reception 5 to 7. Thank you all, and we'll see you tomorrow on the floor as well. Take care. Thank you again.